so far? That's gonna change. So our panel today is Magic Systems, Urban Fantasy, and Epic Fantasy. Now, I don't know if you're expecting some sort of a smackdown. I don't think it's gonna go that way. But Myke is on this panel, so who knows? Joining us today are authors from both sides of the genre split. We have Jaye, author of the Sabina Kane series. We have Myke, author of the Shadow Ops series. Jim Butcher, the man you all gave a lot of money to. Sam Sykes, author of the Aeon's Gate trilogy. And Patrick Rothfuss, author of...
You skipped Steve!
I did! Sam, your head is in the way.
Marvelous people indeed.
I'm sorry, Steve.
What the hell are you?
There's just some guy
here.
Steve Blackmoore! I'm sorry. And of course, Patrick Rothfuss, author of The King Killer Chronicles, or the book that John Scalzi smashes spiders with. So right out the gate, I think it might be a good idea, first and foremost, to define what is a magic system in a novel.
I could take a step in that direction. I think it's useful to maybe put a split in there, because there's what I almost think of as hard fantasy and soft fantasy. It's not like that. I know where you're going to go with it. Where in the same way you have hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, where the hard sci-fi, they're going to like explain the ballistics to you, and there's really a lot of math pinning it all down. I think that in fantasy in general, and in the magic in particular, one of them has a rigid, defined, cohesive framework, and the other tends to be a little fluffier. And you know, honestly, there's nothing wrong with both kinds, so long as you know what you're doing and you've chosen that for a good reason. And so, in terms of what a magic system is, I think, you know, it's a framework, but it can be any type of framework, either very well defined, and maybe going all the way over into the realm of, I almost think of it as numinous magic. It's like there's not a lot of scientific laws pinning it down, but it still has a cohesive structure. That's what you get in The Lord of the Rings. Gandalf just does stuff, you know? It's like there's no, he doesn't learn a spell. It's not a spelliarmus. No, there's none of that. He's like, and now, like, now fire and light. Because I'm Gandalf. But still, just because the rules aren't made explicit, that does not mean that there aren't rules. It's just you might not know it. Another way of thinking of that spectrum, I think of it is scientific magic versus poetic magic.
I think we're done here.
No, I'll add to that. It's when I think magic system, the problem with magic, and you get into this with Tolkien, is that it's very easy to be Deus Ex Machina. And Tolkien, I think, worked better for me when I was younger because I was more willing to suspend disbelief. But you know, hey, the lava's coming out and Doom is erupting and we're all going to die. Oh, here come the Eagles. I guess it's okay. I think that as fantasy has progressed, one of the reasons that nobody likes me is that I'm sort of a literary progressivist. I think that literature, like technology, sort of improves over time as people build on past systems. And I'll call out heretic. I'll call out Pat. The sympathy system in the King Killer Chronicles is an excellent example of this. If you're going to heat fire, you're going to have a corresponding loss in temperature of your own body. Now, why is this important? it's important for a writer to convey to you, the reader, the rules of the magic system. Because if I do that, I can hold my protagonists at risk. There are no eagles that are coming. You know the rules. And then you can ask yourself the question, oh crap, I really care about this character. How are they going to get themselves out of this? And the more those rules are codified, as is the case with Sympathy in the King Killer Chronicles, as is also the case with Allomancy and Brandon Sanderson's works, the more you as the readers have possession of that, and it's a tool for the writer to ratchet up the tension. So I guess what I'm sort of doing is falling on the hard fantasy side of what Patrick is.
Yeah, to me a magic system is mostly how do I make things worse for my protagonist. It's a tool to help me do that, because that's how I create tension in a story and make people worry about it.
You know, and at the same time, I think for me also is the opposite is true. Is if I've got some rules in place, what can I do to screw around with the rules, rather than, well, you're talking about using it to make things worse for the protagonist. Also, what can the protagonist do to be clever to twist those rules to his advantage? Kind of like, I have one thing in D&D that I remember people always doing was casting light spells on people's eyeballs. Stuff like that. Just, okay, I know how this works. How can I use it to my advantage? It doesn't say you can't.
It's -2 to actually cast it to blind somebody. That's your.
Then what's the point of the blind spell? Okay, battle derailed. Sorry.
I enjoy Dungeons and Dragons is that you can take all those spells and do things nobody was meant to do with them, because they can tell you can't.
I'll come out on the side of poetic magic here in defense of it a little. I think, of course, when you are aware of the rules and you're aware that your protagonists are breaking the rules, that does ratchet up the tension. But at the same time, when you're not aware of the rules, but you're aware that the rules exist, it can sometimes feel extremely heartbreaking when a character uses magic and nothing happens. They've just been completely denied. It's not exactly a magic system, but one author that is screwed with a lot of our conceptions this way is George R. Martin. The people who follow the rules all the time get beheaded. And you can do the same with magic. You can, if your readers are aware that the protagonists are breaking the rules, then they sort of do know what to expect, and that can be ratcheting up the tension. But at the same time, so long as you establish that the rules are there, and that a rule has been broken. Like if you do just whip it out, like, no, he died because a plot device hit him. and we get to move this along. Yeah, that's a cop-out, but, a lot of us probably thought, well, why didn't Gandalf use a spell to climb up? He's an old man, and magic doesn't always work that way. He's got bad knees. So the answer to that is also because I'm Gandalf, and I'm old.
Also that poetic idea of magic. Thank you. Random hairs.
I busted out a wig to pretend to be Patrick, and now it's shedding all over.
And now he's giving them to me. He's such a giver. Is that it maintains a mystery, and having magic and not really knowing how it's really going to work or why or how, to me makes it much more interesting, because if I know too much about it, then it feels like science.
And I think because I've kind of put a ridiculous amount of thought into this one thing, and I think you guys have really hit on it. The scientific magic and the poetic magic. First, the main distinction is not whether there or not there are rules; it's whether the rules are apparent to the reader. Because both systems have rules. Otherwise, it's not a system. A system means you have rules. But with the scientific one, there's much more opportunity for the characters to be forced into cleverness and for the readers to feel clever. Because if the reader is there and they're like, oh, like, boy, he's in a bad spot, I bet he could, work around the system like this. Or when the character does something clever, then the reader's like, oh, I see how that's clever. He's like found a workaround in the rules. But you're right, there is very little mystery in there. You lack something of, and part of the appeal of magic is that it is kind of a, it can be, that's kind of
magical.
Yeah, it's magical. I love the term numinous, right? Where it's something other. And so I actually cheated. I wanted both of those things in my world, where sympathy is very much scientific and you can do the math and it holds tight. But then on the other side is naming magic, where you find out there are kind of rules, kind of. There's a framework, kind of. And so it holds together a bit, but still, like, Foth's constant struggle is trying to approach this naming magic in a scientific way, and he fails, and he fails, and he fails, because like, you can't do that in the same way that you can't, like, have a brochure that explains how to achieve nirvana.
Well, and I think too, there's a difference. Like I play in my Prosperous War series about that there are adepts who are born with kind of a genetic predisposition to be able to work magic, but they still have to learn how to do it, versus humans who kind of have sympathetic magic and they use it that way. So there's a great way to build tension between the two types and which one's more powerful and how it defines the culture in the world. So I think you can play them off each other really well too.
I think it's fun to, a lot of times I'll read a book and they want like all the magic, like 18 different things to like show you things are like super fantastic in this book. Whereas a lot of times, if you end up with like one concept that you change in a world, and then you just permeate it naturally through like how society would really evolve if, say, there were dragons. You know, like that one thing is enough. You don't need like all magic all the time everywhere for it to be cool. You know, like in the Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, it's like real world with dragons. And it's not dragons and everything else, it's like just dragons. That's enough to change all of human society. What's that?
It was a bad movie.
I'm glad somebody said that.
And you're a bad person.
Bring a fire.
I warned you, like I told you.
Yeah, you're alright, I'm sure. Just
Can anybody think of like a real crushing example of like poetic magic coming to fruition? The only one I can think of is in Feist's Magician series, where like, yeah.
The Calling of the Shadow. Is that, how many people here have read Ursula Trilogy? Because everybody else get out.
Get on the stage.
But it's but you know what she calls the Shadow. It's really good, and I just ruined it. So.
What's that? I haven't read it.
The Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks.
Well, and the Magician one, you learn some things, and you're with the student learning these things, and then he goes on this big, you know, he like becomes really good at this magic, and then he has like a huge breakdown under stress, and like kind of just, it's like, oh wow, this isn't according to the rules at all, but it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina. It's actually part of the story where he's like, you know, here's all the magic he's learned and he's super awesome. And then he has a psychotic episode and he goes down into the madness place and just destroys everything, and you're like, okay. That is, and I still get a little goosebumpy thinking about that, you know, that scene.
Do you feel?
There's also L.E. Marcus's Saga for Flutes, with all their order and chaos magic, and like all the books on it are like deliberately made to be obtuse. So that you can't really figure it out except for time science.
I was going to say the Force.
Yeah. That's the best example. It was numinous, and then once they made it not numinous, it sucked.
And that's the key, is like it started as this beautiful, ephemeral thing, and so long as you stick with that, everyone will love your stuff. And then you change the game, and you go midichlorians, and everyone's like, no. You're right, that's the perfect example.
For those of you who do write urban fantasy, do you find that it tends to have, or there is more pressure to find unique ways to bond magic and root magic into a modern world?
I've found that there is a real expectation among urban fantasy fans to kind of reinvent the wheel a little bit with your world. I think that if you aren't bringing something new to the table, they're like, it's nothing new. And it's such a crowded genre that in order to stand out, you really do have to put the work into your world building. And if your world includes magic, obviously you have to do something different with that. I just think it's almost a convention of the genre that you have to do something new with the world.
Well, that aside, for me, the magic is just in the Dresden Files at least, it's just one more tool that I've got on the wall of ways to tell a story. Really, what's going to sell your story is your characters and the situations they find themselves in, whether people are going to be able to get behind it or not. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to be able to find ways to make people love your characters, and once you can do that, the rest of it will kind of fall together.
I have a unique situation in that I do military, so Harry Potter had joined the Navy SEALs instead of going to Hogwarts. but that has unique pressures because people who come to military fiction, there is a pressure of authenticity, which is a little easier for me because I'm in the military right now. But believe me, there's nothing that will make people. I'll give you an example. I have 2 Special Forces operators in my second novel, and I made them E4s, or specialists. And the volume of email I got, and I've worked with Special Forces operators. I just zigged when I should have zagged. I missed this one. There's supposed to be 6s. No one under the rank of B6 can be a Special Forces operator in the modern army, and I missed that. And the deluge of mail. So I mean, magic schmagic. Like the military part is really the question.
That's your human assistant is the military.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to Jim's point, which is that I think in the best urban fantasy worlds, the characters are great because they are products of their world, and you can't just take a regular person, like one of us, and put us in a world where magic exists and is used by everyone, and we would be the exact same person. If you're raised in a culture that uses magic, it's going to have an impact on who you are, and so the really good urban fantasists, all of us, use that to create our characters and to put them into situations where they have to face the challenges of their unique world and their unique personalities that is a product of that world.
Actually, to riff off of that, I think that's right. Is that one of the pressures I think that is unique to urban fantasy is that we have to logically extrapolate magic into the culture as it exists. Where when you're creating a world from whole cloth, you have the ability to set the culture of that world in concordance with your magic as you build it from the roots up. And in ways, and I say this not being a regular fantasy author, that may be liberating, I would think. And it also may have its own unique pressures because you have to do a lot more heavy lifting. As an urban fantasist, I can imply something to you. He went to Chicago. Most of you know what Chicago is and what it looks like. I don't have to give as much description. I just realized you write things. So I'm done talking. Thanks.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, I could say they met at Walmart, and it's like, okay, I can be reasonably sure that most of the people around here know what Walmart is. And I don't have to spend 3 paragraphs trying to explain this is what Walmart looks like, and feels like, and sounds like, at 1 o'clock in the morning.
You can do it just by smell.
Fear. For me, I try to focus less on the magic. I like the idea of keeping it mysterious. It's still very present in the books, but I'm more interested in, I'm writing noir, so I'm more interested in that kind of angle and that kind of story and finding ways to fit it into that setting in such a way so that I can still maintain that, so that there are no get out of jail free tickets for them. That's a challenge for me. But you know, much like what Jim's talking about, same kind of thing.
The one thing I want to throw into the mix in terms of something problematic that happens is power escalation. And I mostly want to bring this up so that I can like gush about Jim's books, because it's something that if you read fantasy, you know what happens. You know, like your characters start, you know, it's like 4 people from a small farming village, and then they go and they save the world. And in the process, they come to like grow into their power, and then they're powerful enough to save the world, and then you do a sequel, you know? And unless you're Joss Whedon, like, how do you encore Armageddon? And the problem is, and I think in some ways, not to just throw stones here, but one of the bigger other ends of the spectrum here is the Sword of Truth books, where like the end of that first Sword of Truth book, which I very much enjoyed, that first one. I mean, he becomes like the most powerful wizard ever, and has like all the magic on both sides for the first time, saves the world, kills like a god emperor, and then there's the second book. And you're like, well, how do you challenge somebody who is the most powerful ever? And so, you know, I constructed my world and the challenges because I didn't want to be forced to constantly have to throw apocalypse at my main character in order to challenge him and ratchet up the tension. But admittedly, like, I've only got, well, 2 books, but 3 eventually, hopefully. But like, watching things progress in Jim's books, I have never seen anything handled so delicately and so well, because Harry's always learning things. He's always cool. He's always becoming cooler. And he's always like fighting out of his weight class. But he wins not because he's more powerful, but because he's more clever. And that way it keeps the next book from being like you having to invent reasons why now he can't use the all-powerful sword of killing everyone. You know? And so he goes step, step, step. And honestly, at the 13th book, I'm like, he's still doing it. He's still doing it. And I think that is a huge thing that shows up in both sides of the fence, and in epic and urban, where you end up with power creep, the same thing those of you that play D&D ran into. You know, it's awesome trying to get to 15th level, then you're there and you're like, well, another Tarrasque.
So, like, I have not read extensively into Sword of Truth. It was just a phase in high school. But,
we all got out.
We've all experimented a little. One thing, you know, I absolutely have no intention of trying to tell people what Terry Goodkind was trying to do, but I think at that point, when his character became the sword-killingest guy of all time, he tried to address, well, now what happens now that we are in charge and have the power to shape things as we see fit. A medium that tackles this question a little better is comics. Like, what happens when Superman decides it's too risky to let people have free will?
Right.
Or, you know, if you've ever read the series Irredeemable, which is
Mark Waid Boom Studios, fantastic.
Mark Waid Boom Studios. It's basically that question: what happens when Superman snaps? And then what is the right thing to do? And, you know, Marvel's Civil War arc had a lot of this. I mean, only read so far because eventually just all goes to hell.
It's that's what you can't sustain.
You can't sustain it without arriving at a definite conclusion. You know, by arriving at a definite conclusion, you kind of have ended, and then you don't get any more money.
You don't want to get to book 5 and have to punch out Cthulhu.
The whole point about about stories, the stories have a beginning and they have a middle, and they have an end. And nobody, nobody likes to get to that end part. You've got to have an end to your story, or it's not a story. It's just something you're droning on about.
But we, like fantasy, epic, and urban, do occasionally hit the point where we just keep going because we don't remember how to stop. It happens to the best of us. Well, the other.
Sometimes the size of your story will effectively consume a world. And that's what happened in The Lord of the Rings. You couldn't have a sequel to The Lord of the Rings because it's like, it was the whole world kind of used. It's the end of an age. You can't have Hobbit 2, you know? Yeah. It's Hobbit Harder. I'm seeing the trailers.
Someone start the Kickstarter.
But like specifically, when I didn't want to use up my world with the story that got so big that at the end of it, everything was explored, and you've already seen how big and powerful, and there's an apocalypse, and now the elves are leaving, and I guess I've got to make a whole new world. We can't come back here. So I specifically, like you said, it's about the character. The magic is cool. The plot makes it interesting, but we care because of characters. And so I wanted to tell a person's story, and there's a bunch of people in the world. And this is the other problem: when magic gets too big, it almost of necessity can consume the world.
What do you feel is the worst thing a person can do while developing a magic system?
Rob a bank or...
The worst thing they can do in approaching it.
I mean, I've seen a lot of like newer writers. They'll come and they're like, I don't know, I can't sell my idea, and I mean, I know everybody approaches it differently, but I find that anybody that tries to like fit any kind of world building or magic system building into a preconceived plot is going to run into some problems, because then you're making the rules fit the plot. You're not letting the story grow organically from the world that you're putting it in. And so, and you can kind of see the wheels turning as you're reading. You can kind of just, you see that it's not really coming together. I think that's probably the mistakes.
I'm a firm believer that the only thing that's interesting is other people. That is the only thing worth talking about. It is the only thing, in my opinion, worth living for. Other people are all that matters, and I think this is true in literature as well. So, for example, Watership Down is a story about rabbits that are people, and John McPhee's Basin and Range is a story about rocks that are people, and Naomi Novik's Tamara is about a dragon that is a person, and that's why those stories are interesting and resonate. And oftentimes people will come to me and say, I have this great idea. And they'll start telling me the idea, and what they're talking about is the world that the idea is set in, or the magic system. You know, it's this thing where to cast a spell, you have to take a person's life, and it's the moral confliction. And I'm like, well, that's great, but who's the story about? Who are they? And if you look at all of the most popular TV shows, and reel them off: Breaking Bad, The Wire, Orange is the New Black, Modern Family, Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, Lost, the list goes on, Sons of Anarchy, on and on and on and on. All of these stories have one thing in common, and all of my favorite writers have one thing in common, is that they are almost plotless, and that the magic system, no matter how well developed, it recedes into the background. I love Kingkiller, call him Pat, sorry, because I love Kvothe and I care about Kvothe. And the sympathy stuff is cool, whatever, but it's cool because it helps me to understand the rules that hold Kvothe and Kvothe's goals at risk. So the mistake you make in developing your magic system is in focusing on your magic system. I think if you're going to write a really good book, amazing, complicated, flawed, and compelling people have got to be at the heart of that narrative.
Yeah, and I think that applies pretty much to anything else that will get in the way of the story, whether it's the complex magic system, or a monetary system, or what are the orbits of the suns around the planet, or anything else like that. if it's not actually helping the story and making it interesting and growing the characters and making you care, then it's just in play.
I'm going to quote Sam here from, what was it, at the Tucson Book Festival. We were talking about, it was either world building or like romance in books. You'll see why, because this quote, romance and world building don't always go together. Where somebody was saying, well, how much, if you're writing a romantic scene, how much do you put in before it starts to get weird? And Sam said, I think the rule is the same as like with your world building, like how much world building you do and how much of that you put in your book. If you can tell when the author started to touch themselves, that it's gone too far. Actually, yes, that's the good rule of thumb. You know what I'm talking about?
That's why Sam reads the highlighter. Page 26, there you go.
You're going through this book and you're like, this isn't about me anymore. You're just really into how people make gloves. That said, I think for me, the one real deal breaker mistake that you can make when you're putting magic into your books is the time turner. And it's not just the time turner. Don't think that if you avoid putting a time turner in your book that you've missed this. What it is it's not thinking things through. If you put something in your book because it'll be cool for this scene, and you don't think, what long-term ramifications does time travel have on like the logical consistency of my entire narrative arc? If you don't start at least there, like you've let us all down. You've failed to do your job as an author. If you're hoping to write a logically consistent narrative, if you're doing something extraordinarily postmodern and it doesn't matter if it all fits together, that's different. But, and you see this in lesser ways in a lot of other stories too. I never actually watched Heroes because by the time the noise got big enough about it, everyone was already hating it. And apparently what happened is they're like, wow, cool characters and they've got powers. And then apparently got into the second season and everyone's like, oh right, if these people have these powers, then everything just stops working. You can't maintain dramatic tension with people who can do these things. Because they didn't think it through when they introduced them. You have to do that in the first book. You have to do that when you're building the world in your head. You have to think, what's really going to happen if people can teleport? If people can read minds? If people can read minds, I mean, screw any of, like, whatever. It's like, think how that changes politics. Think how that changes the legal system. I mean, hell with your adventurers. I mean, your economy gets thrown into chaos if people can read minds. You gotta think that through.
I'd say, absolutely thinking too much about the magic system will doom you, but to link them together, probably the worst thing you can do is to make magic mundane. And this is something that I see happen more often than not, where even in the most numinous things, people just sort of activate magic and not have it affect them on some level of their character. It's like the wizard is just the wizard because he does wizard shit. He has never thought like, well, I can conjure fire out of my hands and read minds. Why the hell am I taking orders from anyone? It's this whole sort of idea that Harry Potter. Has anyone read like The Magicians by Lev Grossman?
Yeah.
Interesting study in what Harry Potter might have been if he went to college, and the answer is an asshole. And why shouldn't he be an asshole? He can do all this crazy crap, and someone comes out and says, "Hey, you're the chosen one. All your friends will die. You'll be all right." Oh. Well, what the fuck? What am I doing here for? So I think when you're developing a magic system, think about what happens to the characters who can use it. Think about what happens to them when they can't use it. Think about how that impacts our most base desires. And if you can't provide an answer to that, then again, what's the point of the magic system if it's not going to affect the people?
And put them in weird moral conundrums too.
Weird
You know,
moral
force them-
conundrums are great.
Yeah, I mean, that's where character growth comes from, right? You're faced with a tough decision, and then you have to really figure out who you are. Are you gonna be the person who stops because it's too hard and you give up, or are you gonna like reach down and find your strength and do what needs to be done? Even if, you know, are you, the magic you have to use to defeat this guy might also hurt these people. So, like how do you make that decision? So it's really all about putting your characters in a succession of really horrible, situations. And then, hopefully by the end they've learned something and grown as a person, not just as a magic user.
Teach them a lesson.
There's a great example of that from Black Hawk Down. Did folks see that movie? This has nothing to do with fantasy, but it has to speak to Jaye Wells's point, which is there's a scene where they're getting guys out of downtown Mogadishu where they're getting shot up, and the Humvee comes back in, and one of the soldiers is supposed to go out, he balks, like he can't get on that Humvee and go back into the fight. And the guy, someone who's more alcohol, I don't remember names, looks him in the eye and goes, "It is what you do right now that makes a difference." I don't know if you guys remember, and I think in the end he can't do it. He can't ask himself to go back out.
No, he humps up and gets back in the Humvee.
Well, he does. All right.
Yeah, after they got out to the stadium, and they go back into town.
But that is what I think she's describing. Was one of those moments where I could see the writer turning to the reader and going, "Here's the moment." It was done. I don't want to make it seem like it was done hand-handedly, but it's a great example.
What would be an example of your favorite magic system you've encountered that you did not write? Oops, that's a question.
Avatar: The Last Airbender. Every part of that magic shapes the culture, shapes the martial arts that it came from, shapes the characters that it was using. No world has seemed so profoundly and effortlessly alive without being ham-handed. And it's just incredible, and I rewatch the series all the time.
Oh yeah.
It's just that great.
The finale to Avatar is one of my top 2 or 3 favorite things I've seen on TV.
Incredible.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it
And
yet.
not like top 2 or 3 favorite cartoons, top 2 or 3 favorite things on TV.
Yeah, and to chime in, to show, it's still about the characters. The magic is brilliant, but it would have been really easy for that to become the Avatar show, because he can do everything, right?
Right.
But the writers were always way savvier than that. They didn't allow the power escalation to happen. And each of the other people still had something they could do which made them uniquely awesome. It wasn't just the stone bender who was blind. It was like she turned into a metal bender. And you're like, that is so cool. And can do, he's an awesome water bender, but, I'm forgetting her name. It's like she was a healer. And Aang just didn't have that so much.
And it wasn't just about the powers. Those powers also shaped the characters. Toph, the metal bender, was blind, but because of that, she tolerated absolutely no weakness in anyone. Like, if she was blind and she could become the greatest earthbender of all time, then of course she's not going to feel any sympathy for Aang, who can do everything, but it's hard. And that drove Aang forward, and in turn, Aang helped her overcome basically being a sociopath. So yeah.
I've already called out Pat Rothfuss' sympathy. I've called out Sanderson's Alamansky. I'd like to add Peter V. Brett's warding system from the Demon Cycle trilogy that he writes. The first book's called The Warded Man. And then I wanted to bring out, not the whole magic system, but the Myke Blade, which is a weapon used by Uther Duel and China Mieville's The Scar. And it's a Myke Blade not because it's mighty, but because all of the possible locations of the blade exist at once, which allows one person to take on armies. And it's used integrally in the story, and it's really a kind of, it's not quite poetic and it's not quite scientific, it's more just plain surreal, and it's pretty damn awesome.
Tim Power's Last Call. I love that one. Just everything is on signs and knowing how to read the room and understanding how the cards lay, and the magic is really subtle, and and you're not quite sure, is it really magic, or is it just people who kind of know how to read what's going on? I like that, because it feels mysterious. You think, I'm not sure there are really rules here. They're telling me there are rules, but I don't know. It's still kind of fuzzy.
Yeah, I'll second that one. You know, like they're all sitting at the table, and one of the guys that's in the know looks around and he notices the smoke around the poker table is moving in a slightly strange way, and the level of the drink in his glass is slightly tilted, and he's like, oh, something's happening. And I'm like, this is sweet and subtle and delicious. It's the very definition of this numinous magic.
Right. There's a scene where I think they're going to Vegas, and they've loaded the car with a bunch of tarot cards, just stuffed all over the place. And it's like, what's this? Because anybody who's looking for us is going to see a bus full of people. You know, just because all the archetypes of the tarot cards in there. If you're looking at it, magically, you're like, okay, I'm not quite following all of that, but it works really well. But it's got that same kind of not quite sure, is this real or is this not kind of quality to it. And it just maintains that mystery.
At one point, somebody is hiding in those books, and he's in an abandoned building, and the road that goes around the building, it's all one-way streets, running widdershins, running counterclockwise, and he's made adjustments to the building all over so that everything is not as it should be. The toilets don't follow the Corrales force. They don't flush this way around. They flush this. He's like adjusted them so they're forced to go backwards. He's run hot water through the toilets as opposed to cold water. So everything is out of true, and this prevents people from drawing a bead on him. And I'm like, Powers, if you haven't read Tim Powers, you are doing yourself a vast disservice. There's nobody else puts it together like him.
I'm going to go with the Amber books by Zelazny. The entire concept being able to walk through any reality you can envision and to be able to pick up stuff there, or find people who have been waiting you to show up in accordance with prophecy for generations or whatever. It was a great concept. I love the way it was employed.
Master of the Five Magics by Lyndon
Oh,
Nice! See, I'm betting, who out there has read it? None of you, but all of us. That tells you something. And people say, wow, sympathy was awesome when you came up with that. And I'm like, wow. It's like, I ripped off a bunch of Hermetic magic, the Doctrine of Signatures, a bunch of historical things, and I lean kind of heavy on Master of Five Magic.
I've been sitting here trying to think of some that haven't been mentioned, and one of the things I've realized is that my reading preference actually is not for really hardly codified magic systems, that really complex, the rules, and I tend, I guess, to like something that's a little more flexible. And I was thinking that I would call out my friend Stephen Blackmoore. I just read his book, Broken Souls, which is coming out soon. And I really love the necromancy in his books, and he is kind of married to this death goddess, and he ends up with her power, and it ends up when it comes, it surges through him, it almost overcomes him, so he can't function as well. Like, he has a really good price for when he uses magic.
Go on. Right, that's oh my God, that hurt.
Well, no, I think that his world building and his magic system is really imaginative, and it's a really great example of urban fantasy magic. So you should check that out.
Aw, thank you.
He didn't pay me so
Checks in the mail.
For those of you who do write epic fantasy, do you feel that given that there is such a long and lengthy past for that genre, much like how urban is kind of being asked to root in this modern time, do you feel like you're pressured to create more complex magic?
I had a whole rant about Brandon Sanderson in mind for this, but then I thought the minute I said that, like a sniper bead. As much as we weird magic, bizarre creatures, and world building. And yeah, there is a lot of complexity in that. You know, Sanderson continually changes the bar. You know, and every time he comes out with a new magic system, there's probably like 6 or 7 people in the world who are like, fuck, that was my idea. So yeah, there is a lot of complexity, and you know, if you can't get ahead of the curve, another good thing to do is to run in the opposite direction of it. And you know, I write numinous magic to an extent. It's all completely biological, and it has prices, causes. You know, people are chuckling because there is a scene in which the price is the barriers between magic and biology break down, and one character starts urinating fire. I've never seen Brandon Sanderson come up with a magic system where you urinate fire. And he never will. And if he does, he was ripping me off. So, listen, don't eat your magical penicillin to reduce tension. But, you know, in that regard, like, I think in a lot of ways it's a waste of time to think about what other people are doing out there. Because Myke Cole mentioned this on an earlier panel that we were at. There comes a point in every writer's life where you decide, I like what this author is doing, I'm going to try to be him. Or her. And you just keep going with that for a while. And it doesn't work because you're not him or her. So you kind of just have to go with your own thing. Everyone else will be damned. And, or, you know, just steal from a classic book and and hope no one's read it. It paid off.
I bought all the copies of it. I think to twist it a little bit, I think it's a little bit of a problem because some people who are like, boy, I want to write a fantasy novel. And so they go, well, what does everyone do? Obviously, that's what I need to do.
Right.
And if you start with Tolkien, you know, you say, well, okay, if I'm making a fantasy world, what's the first thing I have to do? I have to have a map. Why? Well, because there's a map.
Just because.
You know, and then you go, well, and you're like, and you read up on Tolkien, you're like, now I've got to create 4 distinct, fully functional, evolved languages. But that's not actually how it works. What happens is Tolkien was a language freak. That's what he was a true geek for.
That's where he started touching himself. You were saying.
It's that whatever you're doing, you should think, I mean, because honestly, I can't be that language guy. I'm not a linguist. I don't have the passion. You know, I'm a bit of an economy geek. You know, and so like my world does have like 5 distinct irrational currency systems, which it's like I make that on my own time, and I don't inflict it on you through the books. I do that for me, and then occasionally there's a little bit of it in there to provide a little grit, a little reality underpinning the world. And then I'll like put the details up on my website sometimes for the other people who are currency geeks. But I'm also a psychology geek and an anthropology geek. And so I do religions, gods, and how societies work. That's what I'm all about. And I'm a former scientist, chemical engineer, so my magic system has like underpinnings in the laws of thermodynamics. But that's just because those are the things that I'm interested in. You gotta figure out what you're interested in, and then be a geek about them and let that inform your world. And if you like making magic systems like Sanderson, you know, then go crazy. But don't think, oh God, you know, Master of the 5 Magics has 5 magics in it. I better get cracking and make 5 distinct magic systems. No, not if you don't want to. You don't need that much.
I've said before, I'm a literary progressivist and see these things building on themselves. And I think what's changing a lot in epic fantasy, and I say this as a reader, not a writer, is audience expectations. And there's a phenomenon that people are calling grimdark. And I'm speaking with authors like Scott Lynch and Mark Lawrence and even George R. Martin, Peter V. Brett. And it's sort of Joe Abercrombie, certainly, right? And it's certainly characterized by this brutal, nasty. But I think what's happening is that audience's tolerance for painting over how rough life can be is eroding, and I think I always say Frodo is the best example of this. Frodo's biggest character flaw is excessive earnestness. He has never done anything wrong in his life. He does not poop. He does not eat. No, he eats lettuce bread like for 15 seconds, but it just magically effervesces out of his skin. There's no actual cycling or defecation going on. And congratulations, now I'm Sims.
Write what you're interested in.
My point of this is screw that, man. Like, if this guy came into my house, I'd kick him out. But I don't deal with that. People are messed up. We make mistakes. We screw up left and right, and that's who I can identify with. And I think that when you see an evolution of more scientific magic systems, and you see an evolution of more flawed characters, I think you're seeing an evolution in the audience. And the audience is communicating those expectations to publishers. And editors are in turn turning around and buying books that are meeting that expectation for the audience. And all of this is happening very subtly and very slowly. So it's less a complexity issue in terms of magic and epic fantasy, and I think it's more an audience expectation issue.
But I would say it's also, the authors are being changed by the society that we live in. So we are drawn towards writing about different things because we're a part of the same society as our readers. I don't think most authors sit down and say, what do the audiences want me to write today? I mean, I think we all want to make our readers happy, but first we have to be fascinated and passionate about what we're writing about. And that's to Pat's point about write what you're a geek about. I mean, we're writing about the things that we find endlessly fascinating. You have to, because it takes a really long time to write a book. And if you're writing a series, it takes a really, really long time. So I think it's interesting when you look at the generations of authors and what they are interested in writing about, because we're kind of a reflection of what's going on in society, what we're writing, and so it's another side of the same coin.
So you both bring up very good points with the evolution of magic systems and how you said with writing over multiple series, and I think Jim is kind of best to comment on it, but how does one keep their magic system that they started with one book that has progressed over a great distance of time and keep it fresh and keep it interesting?
You just make it threaten your character more. So you just find new ways for it to cause problems. And the great thing about writing Dresden in this case is he kind of started out with a little bit of tinkery magic and a whole lot of slugfest magic. And that's basically what he did. And then now as we're getting toward the end of the series, now he's getting the attention of people who are going to be like, okay, I'm going to have to show this kid what it is to be an actual wizard. And there are some people who are teaching him a little more indirectly, and some people who are teaching him a little bit, who will be teaching him a little more explicitly in the future. But it's great because whenever you run into something, whenever you start doing something new with magic, you get to start doing something new with a different portion of that character's, who they are, their personality. So, I mean, there's a reason that these advanced wizards on the White Council, that they kind of all have their specialties. It's because that's who they are. And their magic is going to reflect that. And so, we're going to be finding out more about it. And ultimately, I think that's what this story is going to be about, is who this character is. And what he does with his power is going to reflect it. I mean, I just came out and said it a couple of times in the series. So. Yeah.
Because we've only got a few minutes left to kind of wrap it up, for those who in the audience may be writers themselves who may be having trouble with their writing systems, what is the best advice that you could give, kind of general without going into too much detail, because that could probably be a very long conversation. about approaching their magic system and what they can do to help themselves in that situation.
You should live somewhere cheap. Because if you live somewhere cheap, you don't have to work 2 jobs to pay for your rent and then be too exhausted to write. Because this will take a long time. Don't live in New York or Seattle or whatever. Live somewhere like central Wisconsin, for example. And so if it happens to take you 14 years to publish your book, you know, you don't end up $100,000 in debt.
I'm really glad I don't live in New York.
When you're making your magic, you've got to do stuff that you think is fun. If you don't think it's fun, you're gonna burn out on it. I mean, this is kind of a long-term project, and you need it to be something that you get enthusiastic about, and that you think is cool to play with.
Yeah, to echo that, definitely play with it, and not just, oh, this would be kind of cool, but also find ways to break it. You know, because some of the most interesting things for me have been, oh, if I do this, it breaks this. Oh, but then I get this. You know, and figure out ways to hack it. I think that makes it really interesting too.
He's exactly right, and to expand on that point, first of all, I feel like I should say this, it's sort of my overall thing first. Do not have fun with it. I'm against fun on principle. I seriously don't want any enjoyment happening while you're in this process. But he's talking about hacking it. How many of you folks have played D&D? Everybody else get out?
What?
This is the wonderful thing about gamers. When you're writing a campaign for D&D, you pour your heart and soul. At least I did, just because I didn't date and had no friends in school. But you pour yourself into writing these campaigns, and like you flesh out the NPCs and give them all backstories, and then your players are like, yeah, we're not going that way, we're going that way. Right? I got you, right? Yeah, I remember you. But the point of that is, like, if you game your own system, and you have beta readers who are gamers, they will find a way to break it. They will find those holes and they'll point it back to you. Nerds are pedants. Spend 5 minutes on Twitter and you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
And you know, I want to reinforce that. I will say beta readers. Beta readers. We got to have, nothing disorients me like when I say, you know, somebody's like, so I finished my book and I'm ready to sell it. How do I get an agent? And I say, have you rewritten it? And they're like, yeah, really. I go, have you run it past a bunch of beta readers? They're like, oh no, I couldn't handle that. And I'm like, you know, when it's published, people are going to read it, right? like a bunch of people, hopefully. And so you got to, first show it to somebody who loves you a little, so they'll be a little gentle on you. Because that's important. You're getting a certain amount of feedback, because we all start with very tender skin. And then as you build up the skill of being able to tolerate more and more critical feedback, eventually you want to give it to somebody who doesn't know you at all, like a real reader who would buy it off the shelf, because they will say, I had no idea what was going on here. I'm confused, I'm this. And if you have, also, don't necessarily give it to writers, because what do writers know most about? Writing. And that's, I give my stuff to plumbers and history majors and aquatic toxicologists, and they come back and somebody goes, you know, owls don't build nests, and I'm like, thank you very much. And then somebody else goes, so if this town has like 1 million people, then it must be like at the real center of some trade routes. And I'm like, actually, yes, you're right. And we talk about that, and they help me stress test my ideas. At one point in book 2, somebody said, so this thing you have, I'd thrown in a little bell system. You know, like a bell rings here and then it rings there. And one of my smart friends said, this is really close to a telephone. And I read that note and I just sweat cold. And I sweat cold because I almost committed this horrible thing like that I just said. The worst thing you can do is not do the math and permute it out. Because if there is instantaneous, long-distance communication, then that's going to fuck up my whole world. that changes it in ways that it could not be this world. And then I'm like, so why doesn't this happen? Oh, right, there's the law of effectively diminishing returns. And it made me dig down into sympathy and figure out why that worked before the book came out. A year before the book came out. Otherwise, you really have to backpedal. And there's no way you can backpedal enough from like a time turner style mistake.
A good rule of thumb for any amount of writing, before you get to the beta readers, once you have finished your piece, put it away, sit on it for maybe a month, go do something else, come back. Anything that is wrong with that book, you will see it. Because when you finally finish your masterpiece, you're sweating, it's been a labor of love, it's so great, I'm so great, everything's beautiful. You go, put it away, come back a month later, you're like, this is the dumbest shit. This is the absolute worst, I'm garbage, everything's garbage. And then you come back a little bit, alright, it's not there. But that is the first step to getting anywhere, is to learn to identify where you've screwed up, and then beta readers can help you pinpoint more. That way, you know, they don't send back just a dead rat. They'd be like, this is more than this what I thought. Like, not as threats, but
As friends.
like, yeah, readers will sometimes be like, I saw this, thought of you. Like, you can't say anything because, you know, their hearts are in the right place. Thanks, I'll put it on the blog.
So earlier I was talking about being fascinated with what you're writing, and Pat said that you should really geek out about what you're writing. And the reason for that is that you want to write something that's you, that's part of you. It's in your voice. It's about things that you're passionate about, and that will in turn create excitement in your reader. I would also say steal ideas and make them your own. When I wrote my book Dirty Magic, I had just watched the entire series of The Wire, like over the course of like a very short amount of time, and it really affected me. And so I was like, that's really awesome, but I think it would be cooler if there were wizards in it. And so I basically jumped off from that point and made it so that instead of gangs selling drugs, they sold dirty magic that was addictive. And so it kind of built from there. So I started with an idea that somebody else did, and then I said, well, I think it would be cooler this way. And then if you read it, it's not recognizable as The Wire. There's been, except there are cops and there are criminals. So the idea is you don't have to completely reinvent the genre, but you should make it your own. That's
I was going to say, we are out of time. But let's see if Thomas gets his point. Yes. No, Stephen gets his last point.
Okay, just, no, I forgot. to riff off of what Jay was saying, I think designing the magic system last is probably a better move than the other way around, simply because you don't want to find yourself shoehorning your plot around it. If you've got a story idea, and because really the story is what you're trying to serve. You're not using the story to serve the magic system. It's the other way around. So, the magic system itself may be important and may inform the story, but understanding what your story is before you start trying to figure out all these rules and things for your system is probably going to work out better for you.
I do it the exact opposite way. So do whatever works for you.
Whatever works
your own way.
Hey, look, my mom doesn't think I have any friends, so if after the panel I could get folks to come forward so I could do a selfie with the audience, I'd appreciate it.
And on that note, a round of applause for our wonderful. It was wonderful. All of our authors are available in Authors Alley for signings. Jim, you're kind of off. You're a little wonderful little.
Jim is currently sitting on a golden throne that we are forbidden to look at.
I totally wasn't kidding, so if I can get everybody.
Yeah, he really